Hi there, my name is Lucas Weiss and I am the host of the Weesesports Quarantine Chronicles. For today's episode, I'm joined by Morgan Ragan. Morgan is the color analyst of the Stockton Kings in the G League and one of the co-hosts of the Deuce and Mo podcast. In this episode, I chat with Morgan about her sports media journey, her various stops along the way, her approach to calling a basketball game, and her advice for young female journalists looking to break into a male-dominated industry. The Weesports Quarantine Chronicles is available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. So make sure to like, rate, watch, and subscribe to all three of those channels. Now let's get to episode 58 with Morgan Ragan on the Weesports Quarantine Chronicles. All right, on today's episode of the Weesports Quarantine Chronicles, I'm joined by Morgan Ragan. She is a color analyst for the Stockton Kings in the NBA G League. She's also a co-host of the Deuce and Mo podcast. You can't tell by her wonderful background. Morgan, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Thank you. Thanks. I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's definitely my pleasure, and I wanted to start off because being a broadcaster for any team is quite the grind, as you well know. But when the G League season gets canceled, and now, there are these months of no sports to call, what's that been like for you as a broadcaster?
Yeah, it's just like anything in life. Like if you don't keep doing it with consistency and you don't get more and more reps, you're going to lose it. So it's important for any broadcaster, it doesn't matter which level you're at right now, to make sure to still be watching games or practicing your craft, or like we were just talking about before we went on live, just like podcasting and working on your creative side. It's, even if someone is not paying you to do certain things, keep grinding and keep doing it. So even as a broadcaster, it's the same concept. Like you just got to keep looking for things to really make sure that you're keeping up with your craft.
I think that's some great advice, because I think there are certain ways for broadcasters, whether it's, muting a game and just calling it, or practicing, your voice, just to keep you on your toes, because when sports do come back and you get called to do a game, you got to be ready to go. So I'm just curious if you could maybe just build on that. Like, are you going back to old Stockton Kings games and doing, color analysis? I mean, how are you keeping, your craft strong during this pandemic?
Yeah, so I think a little bit of it comes from obviously just podcasting, which helps you stay on your feet, be quick. You're talking sports. Our Do Some Mo podcast is a sports podcast, and we do it 4 times a week. Now, when it comes to play-by-play and color analysts, it's, really looking at games, muting them. So whatever old school game sometimes is on, you can do the same kind of thing. Otherwise, I don't know if you've noticed, there's some like odd or unique sports out there that don't have the proper coverage or play-by-play and color analysis. Like I randomly turned on some, God, what was it called? It was like high diving, and it's like belly flop. And all I was thinking was like, oh, how would I call this? Or how would I analyze this? And you're hearing the people analyze it. And so then I muted it and kind of was like doing it to myself, like talking about it, breaking down this belly flop. And just even those little things will help as soon as sports do come back and broadcasters are needed again.
Well, it gets you ready, Morgan, if you ever go to the Olympics and call some weird sports like biathlon or weightlifting or judo, yes, when many brought compared to the normal mainstream sports. So good on you for being able to do that. But it's really interesting to me because basketball commentary, it's so fun, because unlike the other sports, I find, basketball, it's so quick, it's so fast, it's constantly moving, like hockey is in many ways, which many of my listeners being from Canada love and appreciate. But what do you think goes into being a successful color analyst? Because I think among the big four North American sports, like the color analyst in basketball is really important to provide that helpful insight and perspective.
I agree. And I used to think that you really had to be a former player to understand and to break it down. And I did play basketball in my life, but what I realized, you really don't have to be a former player. If you know the sport and you do your homework, then you're going to be a good analyst, no matter what sport it is. I remember I had a gig as a sideline reporter for a minor league soccer team in Sacramento, and basketball is my sport. So when it came to soccer, it was all about just doing my homework. I already understood the sport, but then really putting myself in it, in soccer, becoming one with soccer. And that's what helped me really do a good job just as a sideline reporter. Now, going back to analyst, though, it's the same concept. If you do your homework, it's going to roll off your tongue when you're talking, you're analyzing a player and their game. Because if you only know that they're a good shooter, well, what, are you going to repeat that they're a good shooter for the entire game? Oh, yeah, he made that shot because he's a good shooter. No, you got to analyze the rest of the teammates. And if you know about the other teammates and what they can accomplish with his game and the coach's strategy, it's just really breaking it all down, doing your homework on the entire team and every single player.
So, as I said off the top, you're the color analyst of the Stockton Kings in the G League. How many hours of prep are you doing before each of those games?
So I am lucky enough to have a great play-by-play partner who also is the Do Some Mo podcast partner. So we have a lot of chemistry, so we work together a lot. So we kind of had the system down where he would really create our charts. Now, our charts going into games would consist of the Stockton Kings and then whatever their opponent was. And with that, every single game, he would have to go in before every single game and switch and change up the stats because he would have their numbers on there and like, oh, they're averaging 19.7 points per game. And obviously those stats are going to change game by game. So he would have to change that with Stockton. But then when it came to the opponents, G League and the turnover. And so as guys left and right are on the squad, not on the squad, with a different squad, called up, whatever it may be, it's so very important that you are watching their journey and you really understand where they are. So the prep hours, after he would really start doing the charts, it would really come down to sometimes we'd watch a game of the opponent that they were going to play. We would watch a game and really break down some of these players and what their best qualities are. So then if we're in our game, we can actually say, hey, well, we saw them do that in this last game. So obviously it's one of the great things that they do in this game of basketball. So it's hours and hours of prep, it's watching games. It's watching any move, any trade, any player getting called up. So hours. And then when we would get to the game, we would spend more time trying to talk to any coach or player and talk about, usually on the Stockton Kings, we usually wouldn't talk to the opponents, but we'd talk to like a coach, and a coach would break down like what their game strategy would be. So then we would kind of break it down and have like an inside scoop on why the Stockton Kings are playing so much zone defense this game. And it's really just more hours of it as soon as you get to the game. So I don't know how many hours, but I'm just going to go with hours. People, do your homework.
No, I mean, doing your homework is so important as a broadcaster. I cannot stress that enough, because the more that you can prepare, and look, I bet for you, Morgan, you're not going to use everything that you prepare for, but at least you have it at your disposal. At least you're there knowing that, okay, I have this antidote here if this happens, given what you're seeing on the court. And I think the best broadcasters that you listen to, that they're prepared, and it just enhances the overall quality of the broadcast. And you also made the point about the chemistry with your play-by-play partner, because that's so important too. And look, I mean, you hear sometimes the stories of people, they get to the game and that's it. Like they just call the game and that's the essence of their relationship. But I think that the best play-by-play color broadcasting team are the ones that, they spend those off-the-air hours to get to know each other, but also prepare each other, which clearly it seems like you and your play-by-play broadcasting partner are doing as well.
Yeah, it's exactly, you just said it exactly how it is. And it's really because I already know his timing, not only on a podcast of when he's about to finish a sentence or when I should be interjecting. It's the same thing on a G League broadcast. It's, he might have this great call, but I want to break it down before it goes back and forth. I want to it was such a great play. Like, please let me analyze it and break it down. But then there's other times where you've seen the pace of the game in the G League. Sometimes it's just boom, 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 boom. So each call, especially if it's steal, dunk, steal, shot, whatever it may be, I have to allow my play-by-play voice to have that space and have that room to call those highlights. Because if I'm analyzing 2 plays ago, what I really wanted to get out, but then there's like some sick dunk on the other end, I'm not doing my job correctly. So it's really having that chemistry, like you said, and understanding timing.
This was my first year reporting on the Raptors 905, and I had the chance to watch the 905 take on the Stockton Kings just a little bit before the shutdown. The 905 were up, and the Stockton Kings had a great comeback win. I think it was in February. But one play I want to ask you on the Stockton Kings was Kyle Guy, and I had the chance to watch Kyle at Virginia on that amazing national championship run and what he did the Final Four against Auburn, singing those clutch free throws down the stretch, and then ultimately winning the national championship. How would you evaluate his year with Stockton and what he brought to the team?
Yeah, he brought a lot more than I thought he was going to bring. Obviously, you see him and he looks undersized, right? Yeah. You automatically he just his build and everything is just undersized. But the way that he is able to shoot the basketball over, it doesn't matter. It could be the tallest guy on the floor. It doesn't matter who it is. His release and where he releases is so high and so controlled and so beautiful that he was capable of making some phenomenal shots. You trusted him shooting these shots that were 30 feet out, wherever it may be. You trusted him, and I think his teammates trusted him as well. But the other thing that was so special about him was how creative he was getting to the rim. And he did a good job of really blocking his body, utilizing his body enough to create enough space to really finish at the rim, where you don't see that with a lot of guys. Like, I remember we had a guy in Sacramento, his name's Frank Mason. He ended up being the MVP on the Wisconsin Herd. I think I'm getting it right. I'm like, wow, like my brain, where is it going? So Frank Mason, I mean, he's such a good player. Obviously MVP of the G League for this year. And he couldn't find his rhythm of finishing at the rim. And I didn't watch him enough in this last year's G League season. So maybe he kind of bettered himself in that situation. But Kyle Guy already had that in his first season for being an undersized guy.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit a lot of great points about Kyle, and I've again saw him at Virginia and saw him in that game against the Raptors 905, and yeah, I mean, he doesn't, again, he looks undersized, but he has a lot of high basketball IQ, which he brings to the team, and hopefully he can just progress along that way and become a better player. Morgan, I asked this question of all my broadcasting guests, and that is there a call that you've done that you'd like to have back, and why? Putting you on the spot a bit.
God, I don't retain my moments that well. So like, it's usually when I go back, because and that's another thing for the people to know, like, not only are you prepping before a game, you're watching your film back just like an athlete would, and you're seeing what you could have done better, where. And so when I would watch myself back is when I would find those moments. But right now, as an analyst, I can't think of it. I think one of my least favorite things to do is when I jump all over the place or can't find the word that I want to use to describe a player or even a play. And I'll pause. And it's okay to pause for a little bit. But when you're pausing too long, it's a fast-paced game. You remember how a word, and Deuce Mason, my play-by-play voice, was like, all right, and so-and-so has the ball, and he's going to the rim, and, and then he started doing his play-by-play and just kind of was done with it because I couldn't finish my thoughts. So with that, there can't be too many mistakes too, because what I've noticed is people will remember those. They'll remember the mistakes. So just have confidence in what you're saying and what you're trying to get across, and stay focused. Because the reason why I couldn't find the word was because I just lost a little bit of focus. And then once you're spacing out for too long, then you lose a little bit of confidence, and then you're like, oh God, okay, where are we at? So I remember something like that has happened. But besides that, I don't think I've stepped over Deuce as a play-by-play. As an analyst, stepping over them on like a big call is one of the worst things you can do. And I remember doing that in my first season once or twice, but this last season, I got it down.
Well, congratulations, and I appreciate your honesty and your candidness. And for me, like, I know when I do hockey, I do a lot of hockey play-by-play, and sometimes, the visiting team comes in, and it's on me to like ask the coach beforehand to get the pronunciations right of certain names, because of course hockey has some wacky European pronunciations, and sometimes I couldn't get the coach, so I tried pronouncing a name and I know I botched it. But I think what you just said in your answer, and it's true, is you just got to keep pushing. Like, even though you may know that you may miss the word, you may mispronounce the word, you got to keep pushing, because the listeners, I think, would appreciate that more, knowing that you're just flowing in the conversation. And even though you may have made an error, and we want to limit the errors, at least you kept making it sound natural and pushing forward even in that circumstance.
And it's so true. You talk about the names. That's another thing that will take an hour or so alone, whether it's before the game asking coaches or their PR plan, I want to say. And we heard one of our fellow, sorry, I thought I saw something popped up about my internet being unstable, but we're fine. We're
good. Keep going. We're good.
So we heard one of our fellow play-by-play voices with the Santa Cruz Warriors. He kept calling him Isaiah Kanan. And we're like, why is he calling him that? He's saying it wrong. And we went to Isaiah Kanan and we said, hey, is it Cannon or Kanan? And he goes, oh, it's Kanan, but I don't care. Everyone just says Cannon. And we're like, no, dude, this is a huge part of like a broadcaster's job, is to get it right. And just like you said, it takes time and practice to go up to people and really get that pronunciation right. And we were so disappointed that we had it wrong for the whole season, but we changed it by the end of the season. But we take so much pride in names, and as we should.
And I think you made a good point just a bit earlier about looking back at the games that you've commentated. And I know the commentators listening to this, it's not the most favorite thing in the world to do. We're often very critical of ourselves and how we call certain games, but that's how you get better ultimately. And I know for me, I did that a lot last year, and you just notice certain tendencies or habits that you may develop. And ultimately, if you make a note of those and just say, okay, like focus on this, don't say this word, or don't, maybe speak a little slower here on certain parts, it just makes you better as a broadcaster, and it shows that you're willing to improve your craft.
It's so true. Like, I was going to ask you, because you brought this up, did you have a crutch word?
Oh, so for me, like, I always say, like, I'm always like, so that's like the worst. It's like, so I listen to podcasts here, and it's like, I said it again, like, it's one of those things where once, like, my mind is thinking quicker than the words coming out of my mouth, and that phrase, like I don't say or and or things like that, but
Yeah.
is something that like I am really trying to work on, because I just think it doesn't sound great when you say it like 4 or 5 times.
Right. And even for me, I didn't have like a crutch as like a space to say like, it was more when I was describing players, because I love the fundamentals of basketball.
Mm-hmm.
And I would keep analyzing as like, look how fun, like his fundamentals on that play, or it's such a fundamental drop step, it's such a fundamental screen. And I'd keep using that term. And what I realized when I go back is, okay, like, let's slow it down. Stop. You can still use that term, but pick and choose when you use it. Really make it strong when you want to use that word. So you're right. Going back and looking at like a lot of the film, it's sometimes what's fun about it is when you think you have a bad game and you actually listen back and you're like, damn, I sounded good. Like, okay. and then there's those other games where you actually think you sounded good and you go back and you're like, wow, that wasn't as good as I thought I was. So what do I need to change? Let me take notes. And that's what all good, broadcasters should be doing.
I'm curious, Morgan, as a broadcaster, do you often, how do you connect with the fans, just in terms of, whether they're listening, do they provide some, feedback? How do you connect with them? Obviously there's social media, but how often are you doing that sort of connecting with fans and seeing, what they like about the broadcast, what they don't, and how you can improve?
Yeah, I think, social media, as you kind of mentioned, with Twitter is such a fantastic way to connect with people.
Mm-hmm.
And with a lot of the fans in Stockton, there are just such amazing fans. I think we hear it a lot with the Sacramento Kings, that they have some of the best fans in the NBA. And it's true. And you can say I'm biased because I live here, but like, this team has been a losing team for a long time, and these fans stick with them. So then you're in Stockton, and Stockton actually has a pretty good squad, but the fan base in Stockton is great. They want to interact. They want to talk, so they meet you on Twitter. But then on top of that, the Stockton Kings, like their community department, just did a great job of making sure that we did events in the community, whether it was reading books at school for Read Across America or planting gardens in Stockton. So that was another way to interact with fans and the community that we were actually working in. So with that, then people meet you and they know you, and then they get on Twitter or Instagram and they start reaching out and talking to you. And on that, there's been times that there'll be highlights posted on social media. They're mostly the play-by-play voice because it's a highlight, obviously. But when there's a little bit of my analysis at the end of this highlight, it's really great to hear the feedback from the fans or from other broadcasters, appreciating my analysis or my work, or just even a simple clip. So I think that's been the best and easiest way to connect.
That's a great answer. And broadcasters, they may not realize this, but they have such a platform, even if it's being the Stockton Kings color analyst. The fact that you're calling a game and you're representing a team that has a lot of fans, you should use that platform. And it not only grows your brand and your profile, but it just allows the fans to see a face and to connect with people, and to allow a platform where they can, say, you're doing a great job. Maybe, here's a way to improve. So I think it's an awesome opportunity for you. And I think many young broadcasters should take advantage of that if they're calling and representing a team, to get out in the community, get to know people, because that's what sports is all about, bringing people together.
Right. It just like you said, I keep mentioning his name, but Dave Deuce Mason and I, we talk about this all the time. It doesn't matter if it's minor league sports, G League, or if it's the NBA. As a broadcaster, you have a bigger responsibility. It's everything you're doing is bigger than basketball. And it's not about you. It's not about me. It's not about him. It's not about you. It's about the community that you are serving, that you are in as a broadcaster. And to connect, you can connect through the TV, through social media, like you're saying, but really you're going to connect with when we get back to this, the in-person interactions and engagements when we do get back into that part of the world. And it's just so powerful. It's powerful what broadcasters can really bring to the table when it comes to the community. And just like that, it's bigger than basketball.
I want to sort of talk about now how you got in this business. Of course, you mentioned how you played basketball in high school and have always been a sports fan, but have you always wanted to get into sports media?
Yeah, I went to a privileged high school, and this high school had a lot of money. So going into high school, I was a freshman that was playing on varsity right away because I had played all my life and I had worked for that moment. I remember I wanted to be on varsity so bad. And they also, though, this school had so much money that they had a media program. And in this media program, they had an entire studio which had a green screen, a teleprompter, a soundboard. I mean, people were learning how to produce, edit, everything. And I fell in love with that just as much as I fell in love with playing basketball. So then I knew I wanted to do something in broadcasting. Now, growing up, I didn't know, because just being a woman, you see a lot of women being sideline reporters. And I remember thinking like, okay, well, that's the job I want. And as I kept looking at the job, I was like, I don't know if I like love that job, which, by the way, like, I like sideline reporting. Don't get me wrong. Anything in sports broadcasting is so fun. Yep. But I was like, there's something missing with it. And then I would see all the guys doing play-by-play, and I was like, man, I don't think I could really do that. But when it came to the analyst is what really connected me, because when I started doing sports radio is when I realized, oh, I love breaking down anything sports. And football, baseball, basketball, but obviously basketball being my number one. And so growing up, realizing this at like 15 years old, I was like, okay, now I need to pursue my dreams in broadcasting. How was I going to do this? Well, I moved to LA. I thought Los Angeles, California would be like a great place to start. It wasn't. They eat you alive, you know, it's not. They have a lot of sports teams there, but it wasn't. I was viewed as like, you should do entertainment news, or you should do like a travel show. And it was like what? Like, wait, this isn't what I love.
Yeah.
So once I moved back to Sacramento, after I was only there for like a year and a half. And after I moved back to Sacramento thinking, there will never be a job in sports here for me. Well, I got an internship with a local news station with their sports department. And at the same time, got an internship with the local radio station, sports radio station. And so I was an intern at both these places. Guess how much money I was making? Zero, of course. Zero.
Like what every young journalist makes coming up in the business.
Yes. So like during the day I'd be at radio, during the night I would be at News 10. And when I moved, I had to move back to my parents' house. I was probably like 22, 23. And I moved back in, and, so I wasn't paying rent. So it was the only way I was able to do these internships. So after that, though, I just kept building relationships, and that helped me realize what I really wanted to do in sports broadcasting. I realized I loved talking sports. So even if radio wasn't around, I knew I wanted, and that's why, thank goodness for podcasting, and why podcasting is so special to me. And then with that, I kept talking to people as we were at Kings games and stuff, and talking to color analysts, and talking to play-by-play voice, and talking to sideline reporters, and talking even to the NBA writers, and really getting to discover what I wanted to do.
Great answer. And there's so much I want to unpack, because I think, you talked about just the journey, and so many sports media people have these journeys where sometimes you have to sacrifice getting paid, or, you have to live at your parents' house, but it shows in that answer that you love this. And I think, a lot of young, writers or journalists that I talk to, they say, well, working in sports would be so cool. But then I ask, well, do you really love it? And not many
Mhm.
people are willing to, take those, jobs where you're just an intern, where it may seem like you're not doing the most important work, but that's how you get ahead in this industry. And I think also you made the point about making relationships, and you can't underestimate the importance of that, and just being able to just show who you are and what you're all about to a lot of different people. You don't know if one of those people that you make a relationship with in your network can lead to a job opportunity. So I think those two things, just being willing to hustle and to grind for opportunities, as well as making relationships, will only enhance your chances of having a successful career in this industry. And look what you've done since those early days. A lot of really cool things.
Yeah, and it's just like you said, the relationships and the being willing to grind. And the other thing I would tell people though too is that, don't expect to be making a lot of money. Like if you want to make a lot of money, go be a nurse, doctor, lawyer, engineer. Like in sports broadcasting, unless you're at the top of the top, you're not going to be making a lot of money. So do not get into it for the money or the fame, being on camera and stuff, whatever. Some people, don't really care about the craft of what they want to do. They're just like, I want to do anything in the sports world just because I want to be in sports. And it's like, well, that's okay to have it broad right now, but why do you want to do it? Do you love the grind? Do you love the relationship building? Because I didn't think I was always a people person, but what I realized in this business is you have to be a people person. You have to connect with others, because those relationships and that reputation will go so far in anything you choose to do in the sports world.
And whether it's, in pandemic times now or just in normal times, a lot of young broadcasters and journalists are looking for opportunities. And for broadcasters, it's often sending their demo reel out to certain, news directors or employers. It might be writing clips if you're into writing to different outlets. Can you talk about that process and how you persevered? Because what many broadcasters and journalists need to understand is you're going to get no a lot of the time when you're sending out your reel or your resume. But it takes that one person to say, I really love what you bring. I'm going to take a chance on you.
Yeah, that process, it's draining. It's sometimes you'll want to lose all confidence, and you'll question sometimes too, like, wait, do I belong in this business? Should I be, working here to pay my rent and my bills? Like you do have to process all those things. So now when I first started, what I remember doing, because I was already doing the internships for free, I was like, all right, well then I'm going to keep grinding and working and doing more things for free to brand myself. And what I started was some stupid little, it's not stupid, I shouldn't call it that. I look back at it now and I'm like, oh man, I should have done so much.
We all do, and we look back at the things we created a few years ago. It's normal.
Yes. So it was called Mo's Minute, and I would totally bring this back, because I love, like, it's a cool concept where I would just do a minute rant on whatever sports topics were going on, and I didn't want it to be like a hot take either. I didn't want to just be like Stephen A. Smith or Skip Bayless and be like, oh, I'm just going to go off. Like, I wanted to feel and have a connection to the story I was talking about. So I would record these and put them on YouTube, and I remember people were like, I remember friends thinking kind of like, oh, it's weird that you're doing this, like, why are you doing this if no one's asking you to do this, basically? And it's like, that's when you'll get noticed the most, is when you're doing things without being paid, without being asked. So that process of having to get dressed up and set up my camera, set up a topic, produce my whole 1 minute. In 1 minute, it takes a lot longer, and especially once you go back and have to edit it because you want it to be 1 minute. So it just took that extra time and that extra work. And so for all the people out there, Like, I've been on phone calls with other people who are trying to become, are working toward their journalism degree or trying to be in the business. And I'll be on phone calls with them. And the number one thing I say is just do it. Just post it. Like, even if you think it's bad, post it, because you have to find that confidence within to get the first one out there. And then you'll get the second one out there. And then my second piece of advice would be consistency. Now, just because you got 2 out there, you don't get to lay back and relax. When's the next 2 coming out? You really got to just keep pushing, and people aren't paying you to do this. So sometimes you lose that motivation, but if you want the job enough, you won't lose the motivation and you will keep going. So for all the people that, are wanting to get into this business, the grind never ends. It still hasn't even ended for me, and it won't end for me for a long time.
It's my catchphrase, Morgan. The grind never stops. I mean, people that follow me on Twitter know I say that a lot. It's a little bit of a catchphrase, but it's so true. And I think you make such a great point because, look, journalists 20 years ago, they would have gone down a conventional route, whether it's they go to university, they go to a newspaper, they go to a magazine, and that's their career. Now, though, with the invention of social media and different technologies, there's not as many barriers to entry to create content. And if you have the knowledge of video production, audio editing, using the microphone, using Final Cut Pro to create your own content, it's now easier than ever to get it out there. And I think you make a really important point about just saying, get it out there. What's the worst that can happen? Take that risk, because you never know. It could become the next big thing where people are suddenly gravitated towards you because you're producing compelling content.
Right. And Lucas, how long have you been doing this podcast?
So I started this podcast in May during the pandemic. And for me, and for me, like, if normal sports were going on, I don't think I would have had the time, because I would have been out at live sports. I would have been doing live hits, broadcasting, things like that. Yeah. So this has just been, what started as just a pandemic project could have the legs to continue because of the fantastic guests like yourself that have come on to bring so many great advice and great content.
I just noticed, I asked because I'm like, you're so kind, you're so good with asking questions, and I feel like connecting and just making things easy. And even when you're reaching out, you're just so very professional. And I asked because I go, oh, he must have been doing this for a very long time. And that's cool to hear that it's only been since May. And that's why, like, I know you will understand, okay, well, this is just a start. And if I stop it, then I'm going to lose anyone that trusted me and wanted to follow my story too and my podcast. They're not going to follow you anymore unless you stay consistent. So exactly, it's just really about the grind and staying consistent with this. So, and I hope you do, because I think you have a great thing going on here.
Well, I appreciate the kind words, and for me, it's just been a great treat, because I think when people are creating podcasts, it's like, okay, what goes into a successful podcast? And it's all about finding an audience. And I think now more than ever, for young journalists, broadcasters, writers out there, they're trying to find ways to get into the industry. And what better way than to listen to people who are in the industry right now and are doing really great things. And the great thing is, Morgan, you can have a long career, and for you, like, your career is just beginning, right? And like, maybe 5-10 years from now, you're doing, you're in the NBA calling games, not just the G League. So it's like, that's the goal. And, but the sky's the limit. And I just think that if I can inspire one person to, get in this industry by, having a really compelling guest on and talk about some of these important topics, then I've done my job. And hopefully that just continues on with more exciting guests. And I'm sure with you and what you're doing with the Stockton Kings and the Deuce and Mo pod.
Yeah, no, it is. And I think that's also been one of the fun things too, is just obviously being a female voice, because we're still lacking so many female
Of
voices.
course.
And so you're exactly right. If you could inspire one person, man or woman, but I think about the amount of women that don't see themselves, just how I only saw myself like, oh, I see a woman as a sideline reporter, so I see myself. So if there's, one woman out there that you're inspiring to hopefully, or we're inspiring to hopefully, take that next leap into what they really want to do. If it's not sideline, if it is play-by-play, go for it. There's a place for you. And especially where our world will hopefully be going, there will be a place, a more diversified sports media world.
Well, it actually leads perfectly into my last question for you, Morgan. And that, of course, sort of goes along those lines, because you're one of the very few female G League broadcasters. And for me, it's, there's so many out there, so many talented women in sports media, but they just haven't been given opportunities. And I think, we need to create more of that space, like you said, for a diverse media. A two-part question, like, at first, like, was it intimidating for you to be one of the only female G League broadcasters? And how are you serving as an inspiration to young women who are looking to get in this industry and see you and say, I want to be like Morgan calling basketball games?
Yeah, no, I would love if there's, young women who are saying that one day, obviously. But to answer the first part of the question, I think the reason why I was never intimidated when I first got into anything like sports radio and the color analyst position was, I think it started when I was younger and I grew up playing in an all boys basketball league. And I truly only saw myself as one of them. Like anything they could do, I could do. The only difference was the body type, with some of them. This is 8th grade, so obviously some of these kids, these boys don't even have their growth spurt yet, so I'm like bigger than them. But then the other ones, where they can body you down and use their size, but it never intimidated me. I was like, bring it. It was just one of those things. So I think I took that attitude as a young girl, as a woman in sports, and was like, bring it. Like, what I realized with even sports takes was a lot of these men that are very adamant on their takes, and they're like, you're wrong, and it's crazy that this line still comes up. You're a stupid girl, get back in the kitchen, or whatever the hell it is.
Yeah.
It doesn't even faze anyone anymore. But it's like, what I realized about those people, I go, oh, they're just so confident in their subjective take about sports or whatever we're talking about that they think that they are not wrong. So I kind of went into it with the same confidence of, okay, well, my subjective take I think is just as right as yours. We just agree to disagree. So kind of going forward with that and realizing like, oh, no, there is no right or wrong in some situations when it comes to sports. It's really just people's opinions on when you're talking about a player and how good you think they are in this league or where they will go as their future in their career or whatever it may be. But for your second question, for women, to inspire women as we keep going, like, I think the number one thing I always say is be willing to fail, but don't accept failure, because you have to post that video. You have to go for that job. You have to do all the things that you see anyone else in the sports industry, which is, majority are men. So anything that they're doing, you got to do as well, and do it better. Do it however else, you need to do it, but just do it right, do it better, be kind to people, and be willing to fail, but just don't accept failure.
Some great advice and perspective from Morgan Ragan. She is the color analyst of the Stockton Kings, as well as the co-host of the Deuce and Mo podcast. Morgan, thank you so much for coming on the Weesports Quarantine Chronicles.
Thank you so much for having me on, Lucas, and keep this up because this is an awesome podcast.